The gate didn't even open fully, just enough for her face to be seen. Her headscarf was damp from sweat, her shoes worn from walking all morning. In her hand, a crumpled folder. Inside, her life reduced to documents. Her late husband's death. Certificate, a church reference, and a folded envelope with exactly 38,000 naira. She had counted it 5 times before leaving the temporary shelter. The man at the gate didn't ask for her name. His eyes scanned her face, then dropped to the small boy by her side, whose thin frame clung to her hand like a question mark. The man didn't smile. He just said, "We don't want problems here," and began to close the gate. It was those words, those 7 syllables, that collapsed the floor beneath her. She didn't beg. Not again. She just stood, still and quiet, as though silence could convince him to look again and change his mind. But the gate locked with a click, and that sound was louder than the traffic, louder than her son's cough, louder than the shame clawing up her spine. She turned around. The boy didn't ask what happened. He had heard the same words before. He was learning, too young, how rejection comes fast and casual, how it doesn't pause to explain itself. The sun burned down as they walked, away, cutting through crowded pavements with heads lowered like criminals. No one stared. That was the worst part. People passed them like ghosts, 2 bodies fading into the background of a city that moved too fast to care. She tried the next house, a smaller building with cracked walls and hanging wires. No gate this time, just a man sitting under a faded umbrella, holding a ledger. She greeted him with politeness and hope. He looked her over, then nodded. Room is 15,000. Deposit is same. But we don't take widows with small children. He didn't even say it with cruelty, just like stating the weather, like saying, "It might rain." She thanked him and walked away. The boy hadn't eaten since morning. She pulled a piece of bread from her bag, tore it in half, and handed it to him. He didn't smile. He chewed slowly, his eyes red. She didn't eat. Hunger had learned to sit inside her without complaint. They reached the main road again. Her feet hurt. Her back ached. Her clothes were stuck to her skin with sweat and sorrow. The shelter had warned her. 2 more days, and they'd have to give her bed to someone else. They only had room for emergency stays, not long-term stays. She wasn't emergency anymore, just inconvenient. Her husband had died 4 months ago, a construction accident. The company blamed him. No compensation, no justice, only a shallow grave and a bag of his clothes returned in silence. The landlord kicked her out 6 weeks later when she couldn't meet rent. She sold everything, TV, mattress, even her blender, to survive. But survival was not enough in this city. You needed connection, status, or luck. She had none. That night, she returned to the shelter with blistered feet and no address. The boy slept on her lap on the concrete floor as others snored beside them. She stayed awake, listening to the quiet hum of fans that barely worked, thinking of the words. We don't want problems here. Was she the problem? Was grief a problem? Was motherhood, poverty, widowhood? All of it a burden too heavy for city walls? She rose at dawn and bathed with cold water from a broken tap. Her son barely opened his eyes when she wrapped him in a faded towel and dressed him in his cleanest shirt. She still ironed it with care using someone's borrowed pressing. Iron. Dignity. Even if no one else cared, there were only a few places left on her list. One was a tiny back room listed through a contact from the church. She walked there slowly, praying silently. It was hidden behind a shop, barely visible from the road. A dusty hallway led to a wooden door, half broken. The woman who opened it was older, maybe in her 60s. She looked at the widow's tired face and then down at the child, who now clung tighter than ever. "What happened to your husband?" the woman asked quietly. The widow answered without detail. "He passed. Worksite accident." The woman didn't speak for a moment. Then she opened the door fully and stepped aside. "Come in first. The floor's clean. Sit." It wasn't a promise, it wasn't a miracle. But it wasn't a rejection, and that, after all the days of slammed gates and invisible eyes, was more than enough to make the poor widow's knees give slightly as she entered. She didn't smile, but her heart exhaled for the first time in days. The room had no ceiling fan, no wardrobe, no bed frame, just a cement floor, a dusty window, and peeling walls stained with old damp. But the widow didn't look at any of that. She looked at the corner where the sun hit gently through the curtain, casting a clean stretch of light, enough space for a mat, and for her son to sleep without fear. The older woman stood by the door, arms crossed, watching silently. She asked no questions about rent. She didn't ask for papers. She only said the room had been empty since her sister died. It hadn't been swept since then. If the widow wanted it, she would have to clean it herself. No electricity most nights. Water only from a shared tap. But it had a roof and a door. The widow said thank you with her eyes. She had learned not to say much with her mouth anymore. Words had become expensive. Wasted too often on people who saw her only as trouble. She swept the room slowly. Each stroke of the broom removed not just dust but the layers of rejection still clinging to her spirit. Her son sat in the corner, tracing lines in the concrete with his finger, too tired to speak, too used to disappointment to ask questions. She cleaned until her back ached, then laid the sleeping mat she carried in a tied-up bedsheet. She spread a wrapper over it and sat down, exhaling with a weight that was more emotional than physical. The boy curled into her lap without request, and for the first time in many nights, she didn't have to keep one eye open. The door creaked. When it closed, but it closed. Outside, city life roared on. Buses honked, people shouted, music blared from a nearby stall. But in that small room with no furniture, silence finally touched her. Morning came with harsh sunlight and the echo of a knock. The old woman brought her a small bucket and a cracked plastic plate. She said the child could use her toilet sometimes, but not every day. And the widow would need to do chores around the compound to stay longer, sweeping the front, scrubbing the gutters, emptying bins. The widow nodded before the words even finished. It wasn't charity she needed, just permission to exist. Later that day, she walked into the streets to find food. Her last cash was now less than $15,000. Too little to rent, too much to beg. She went to a roadside mama put and bought rice, just enough for the boy. She sipped water from her palm and told her stomach to be silent. It obeyed. She walked to the church office afterward, where a pile of women sat waiting to see the welfare officer. She added her name to the list, number 16. When they finally called her hours later, the officer didn't look up fully. He checked her file, muttered something about rotation, and said they'd call her if new food parcels arrived. Then he added, quietly, that too many people were now depending on donations. It's not sustainable. He meant, don't come every week. She walked back in the heat, shoes pinching her feet, sweat drying in layers on her back. When she returned to the room, her son was asleep on the mat, holding a school notebook like a blanket. She sat beside him and stared at the wall. It had been her husband's dream to get their son into a good school. Not the free government one with broken windows and overcrowded classrooms, but one with a proper chalkboard, a toilet, a desk for every child. He had said that education would be their boy's ladder. He worked overtime, missed meals, risked dangerous shifts on scaffoldings. And one day, he didn't come back. Now that dream hung heavy like a memory with no ending. At night, mosquitoes came. They had no net, just the wrapper pulled high over their heads. She stayed awake, slapping at the air, listening to the boy's shallow breathing. Sleep had become something she visited in fragments, like a guest unwelcome in her own body. The next day, she started cleaning the compound early. She scrubbed the gutters till her fingers pruned. She washed plastic chairs used by tenants. She fetched water from the shared tap before anyone else woke up. One of the tenants, a middle-aged woman in a wig and loud lipstick, watched her through a window and shook her head. "This one looks like trouble," the woman muttered to another. The widow heard it, pretended she didn't. The landlady came in the evening, nodded at the clean compound, and said she could stay the week. No promises after that. The room wasn't hers, just hers, for now. She nodded again. In this city, for now, was the closest thing to stability. That night she found a small candle from her bag. Her son used the weak light to scribble numbers in a half-used notebook. She watched him, forehead furrowed, tongue poking from the side of his mouth, writing like the world hadn't tried to erase him yet. She didn't cry, not even once. Her eyes had dried weeks ago, like a river refusing to return. Instead, she whispered one sentence into the night as the candle flickered. "Just a week. I will make it stretch." And as the city slept, the poor widow lay down beside her child, in that hot, cramped room with no lock, clutching a hope that no one gave her, but she took anyway. The first sign of rejection didn't come from the landlord. It came from the tenants. It started with silence. Long, deliberate silence, the kind that wrapped around her when she passed by the corridor. No greetings, no eye contact, just a shift in conversation whenever she approached. Then came the stares. Quick glances followed by whispering. She knew those looks. She had seen them in church, on the street, even in the hospital when she asked too many questions after her husband's death. They didn't look at her like a thief or a criminal. They looked at her like a warning. This is what happens when you're poor, when you're left behind, when you have no man. The landlady hadn't said much since that first week, but she'd begun asking for daily updates. "Have you found work yet? When can you start paying for the room?" Not in anger, but in that tight tone that pretends to care. The room still had no lock, and the widow made sure to sit by the door every night until her son fell asleep. Her body had become the barrier between him and the world. No man would walk into this room without going through her first. She visited shops and stalls, asking for cleaning work. Most said no. Some said maybe. One offered her half pay for full shifts. "If you don't like it, I'll find someone else." She didn't argue. She took the job. It was a bakery 2 streets down, hot and full of flies. Her job was to sweep, mop, wipe the counters, and carry trays to the back. They gave her expired bread for her son. Slices of it, still edible if toasted. It was better than nothing. She took it home in a black nylon bag like treasure. On her 3rd evening there, she returned to find someone had stepped on her mat with muddy slippers. Her son said it happened after she left. She didn't ask who did it. She just scrubbed the footprints away and tucked the mat under the bed, frameless mattress. That night, her back burned from bending over soap water. But she didn't complain. Her son needed to eat. He needed a mother with dignity, not a woman curled up in defeat. He had started asking about school again. Every morning he watched children in clean uniforms walk past their building. He asked when he would return. She told him. Soon. She didn't say how. The truth was, even the public school had fees. Uniforms, books, forms. Just the forms alone would swallow her bakery wages. On Thursday, she returned late. The bakery had kept her an extra 2 hours. She rushed home, feet blistered, arms weak. The corridor was dark. Someone had turned off the main switch for her, sighed. Her room was the only one in shadow. She lit a candle, but the wax was almost gone. Her son had fallen asleep on the mat, curled like a question mark. She sat beside him and opened the nylon bag. The bread had gone sour. Her stomach growled. She still didn't eat. She covered it and promised herself she'd find something else tomorrow. The landlady came the next morning. She had that face again. "You're running out of time. Look, "You've stayed 2 weeks. Others are asking questions," she said. The widow nodded. She offered to clean the upstairs corridor, too. She offered to fetch more water. The landlady didn't say yes, but she didn't say no. That afternoon, it rained. The roof leaked into the corner. The widow moved her son's mat, then placed an old plastic bowl to catch the drips. Rain made. The city pause, but not her thoughts. She counted every naira in her purse, just under 6,000. Enough for 1 more week. Barely. That evening, the bakery owner threw a tantrum. Something about workers being too slow. He yelled at her for dropping a tray. Her back hurt. Her hands shook. She said nothing. He cut her pay. She walked home with less than 500 in her pocket, soaked from the rain, clutching the black nylon bag. No bread this time, just crumbs. At the gate, she saw the lipstick woman again. She laughed with another tenant and looked at the widow like something stuck under her shoe. The widow stepped inside. Her son ran to her with a drawing. A stick figure, a house with a roof, a sun in the corner. He had written his name at the top. She smiled and placed it on the wall with a piece of tape. That night, the wind howled through the window crack. But they slept. Not peacefully, but they slept. The next day was Saturday. Church would be open. She went early to sweep the compound and ask if any donations had come. The pastor's wife wasn't in. The office assistant said there was nothing new. No food, no money, no provisions. "Keep praying," he said. She walked back slowly. Prayer was starting to feel like a long echo with no return. But when she returned to the compound, something was different. A bag was outside her door. A black nylon bag tied tight. No name, no note. She opened it carefully. Inside, a loaf of bread, a sachet of milk, and a small packet of salt. Not much, but enough. She looked around. No one was in sight. Someone had seen her. Someone cared, even quietly. She didn't smile, but her shoulders lowered for the first time in days. Even in silence, mercy had passed by. Sunday came quiet. The city still hummed in the distance. Generators, buses, loud radios. But inside the room, it was still. Her son woke early, curled, against her side, warm from sleep. She had nothing new to give him, but she poured the last sachet of milk into a small tin cup and stirred in warm water. He drank it slowly, like a child used to making small things last. She placed the black nylon bag under her wrapper and whispered a prayer. Not a desperate one, just words of thanks. The anonymous gift had meant more than food. It was proof she hadn't disappeared. The landlady didn't call her that morning, didn't knock on the door, but the silence from the other tenants felt louder. No one said good morning. She swept the corridor, cleaned the gutters, poured disinfectant in the shared toilet. They still avoided her, but she wasn't there for their comfort. She was there because her son needed 4 walls that didn't ask questions. In the afternoon, the bakery called. They said not to come again. Too slow. Too tired. "We've found someone else," they said. The widow listened. She didn't beg. She said thank you and ended the call. Her hands trembled for a moment after. That job, as hard as it had been, had kept them alive. Now it was gone. Again. She sat down in the corner of the room, her son asleep on the mat, breathing softly. She didn't cry. The tears had long stopped. She just stared at the wall, then at the boy's drawing, still taped up, still bright with hope. That evening, the landlord's nephew, a stout young man with loud music in his ears, came to the compound. He knocked on her door, not softly. She opened it quickly, thinking maybe someone else had sent help. But no. He looked past her into the room, scanned it like someone inspecting damaged goods. "My aunt says you've overstayed," he said. She stood quietly. He continued. "She won't chase you, but she needs someone who can pay. She's already doing you a favor." The widow nodded once. She didn't argue. She thanked him softly and closed the door. Her son stirred on the mat but didn't wake. She sat beside him and picked up the notebook he'd been writing in. On the last page was a list. Go back to school, help Mummy with water, buy her shoes when I grow. Her hand shook slightly as she closed it. The following day, she rose before the sun. She packed their few belongings, clothes, a broken mirror, the sleeping mat, and the church reference letter. She left the room cleaner than she had found it. She folded the boy's drawing and placed it in her bag. Then she woke her son and said, "We're going." They didn't go to another landlord. They didn't knock on any more gates. They went to the public welfare office near the city hospital, where people sat in rows holding papers, waiting hours just to be seen. She waited 5. When her turn came, she spoke clearly. She asked not just for food or a shelter bed. She asked for placement, somewhere stable. She explained everything, not to beg, but to be heard. The woman at the desk sighed. She handed her a number, a date. Said, "No guarantees, but come back. Maybe we can place you in a city program for displaced women." It wasn't much, but it wasn't no. It was a crack in the wall. That night, she and her son returned to the church. Shelter. No room left inside. She slept near the gate, her son on her lap. One of the guards gave her a blanket without speaking. She covered the boy and sat upright the whole night, staring at the clouds. She wasn't safe. She wasn't settled, but she was still here. A week later, the city program called. They had space in a shared housing block, tiny, loud, full of rules, but with a proper bed and a rotating job placement list. She took it without hesitation. The job she got was at a cleaning agency, offices, supermarkets, some schools. The pay was irregular, but enough to buy rice, enough to start again. Her son was enrolled in a free community school, a uniform donated, books second-hand. He smiled more now, still asked questions, still wrote in his notebook. One evening, after dinner, he placed something in her hand, a new drawing. It showed a tall building, stick figures at the top. He had drawn her at the very top, holding a broom and a crown. And at the bottom, a tiny sign. "This is Mummy. She cleans things and makes us okay." She didn't cry. She just folded it neatly, placed it next to the old drawing in her bag, and whispered, "They didn't want problems, but I stayed." That was the end of the road the world tried to block, and the beginning of one she built herself. One quiet job, one warm blanket, one unseen kindness at a time.